The three kings. Okay, so there weren't three of them. They weren't kings. They didn't visit on Christmas. And who gets myrrh as a gift for someone on Christmas? That's what we're talking about this week. We three kings are not really kings. Hello all, I'm the Mad Pastor, and Christianity sucks. It's out of touch, it's boring, it is irrelevant, but it doesn't have to be, and let me explain why. This week we will be reading the story about the Magi, the wise men from the East who visit Jesus, and it's coming from the book of Matthew, chapter 2, verses 1 through 13, and they sound like this. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, and having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. Okay, let's start unpacking all the things you were told that are not true. First of all, nowhere in this text does it say that there were three of them. The number of gifts is 3, and so some people started making assumptions that there were 3 wise men, but that is not in the text at all. In fact, likely, because they were coming from so far away, probably Persia in the east, they were traveling in a caravan. They would have had camels and resources and servants, and they would have had a lot going on to make such a large journey. There were probably way more than just 3 of them. Second, they were not kings. I don't know where that came from. Some Catholic dude at some point decided that they should be kings and even went so far as to give them names. Melchior, king of Persia, Gaspar, king of India, and Balthazar, king of Arabia. This is like extended universe stuff. This is not in the text at all, but it's, it's fun. It's fun to think of that kind of stuff, but it has absolutely no bearing on what Matthew is actually trying to say with this particular text. So they weren't kings. What were they then? They were magi. The Greek word is magoi, plural for magos. Later in the book of Acts, that Greek word gets interpreted as magicians. Sometimes it's like dark magic. So it has this mixed kind of vibe to it. Most scholars today agree that we should translate that as astrologers. These were mystics who stared at the sky. They were looking at the stars and the planets for signs of something to come. They were trying to predict the future by watching the movement of the stars and the planets. Third, we know that this didn't happen on Christmas. This was not the birth. There's a couple of clues. One is that they visit a house. Not a stable, not a barn, not a cave, but a house. By this time, Joseph and Mary have returned home to somewhere around Bethlehem. The second clue is that later in the story, King Herod begins to kill every child 2 years old and younger. So not just newborns, but 2 years old and younger. There's some clues here that this probably happened a year or more after the actual birth of Jesus. So it's not really part of the Christmas story as much as it's part of Jesus's early toddlery, infanty life. Okay, let's talk about the star a little bit. A lot of hay has been made about what this celestial event must have been that led them to the actual home of the Christ child. Some people think it was Halley's Comet, which would have made an appearance around 12 BCE. So, it's pretty close time-wise. Some people think it's a combination of several stars that looked like one star in the sky. I'm not an astronomer, so I don't really know. But these are the theories. Here's the point I want to make. It doesn't matter. Matthew is not trying to make an astronomic point here. He's trying to tell a story and indicate something about the nature of this Christ child who's been born. Okay, so if those are all the things that we got wrong about the text, what is the text really about? I'm glad you asked. In order to understand what this text is really about, we got to look at King Herod. Now, who is King Herod? First of all, he's not really a king. He's under the boot of Rome. Rome has propped him up to be king of Jerusalem, but really he's subjugated under this massive military might, this power of Rome. So Herod's there to keep the peace and keep Rome happy, keep the people in line. Herod's response when the Magi show up is that he is frightened. Now, we've talked about the shepherds being frightened. That was phobiomai. This is a different word. It's tarasso. And that means deeply grieved, deeply distressed, and in some cases cause a riot. Now, how can one person cause a riot, you might ask? The next sentence after Herod is frightened is all Jerusalem with him. It's not just about this king puppet. It's also about the rest of the population in power. They had gotten used to the power structure of Rome being in charge, and this idea of a new king of the Jews being born was terrifying not just to the king, but to all of Jerusalem. There's this thing in biblical study called contrast. It's one of the structures we pay attention to. And in this text, there is a clear contrast between the people of Jerusalem who are supposed to be looking for their new king, this Messiah, this Christ to be born, and the Magi. The Magi who are foreigners from another world, from another faith, from another worldview, and they're the ones who show up looking to pay homage to the Christ child. There's a contrast between the powers that be and this new thing that's coming, and the people who enlighten us, the people who shed light on this contrast, are foreigners, outsiders, people who don't belong. This is a critique to the people in Jerusalem about whether or not they will actually get on board with this new thing that God is doing. And I dare say that's a message that really belongs in our current situation in the church. God is doing new things. Will you get on board with what God is doing, or will you try to snuff out God's new work? Will you be frightened and give in to that fear of change, or will you get on board with the new thing and the new way that God is saving, redeeming, and healing people? That's what this text is ultimately about. So, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.